Today we will focus on everything social media. We'll first reinforce why you should go on social media even if you're reaching HCPs. I know a lot of healthcare professionals have doubts about that, thinking that it's not yet the time, it's not the right platform, they prefer to have their own website. But social media is nowadays something very important. We will go more in detail into general and professional networks, understand what is the difference between them and how to use them. And we'll go then in detail in each of them to see a few examples and see how we can actually create campaigns, paid campaigns, how we can optimize them and make the best use of them. And we'll end up with a few tips on content, because content is the base to everything. If you don't have good content, then you'll have issues reaching any HCPs or capturing the attention of the HCPs. If you have any question during the presentation, don't hesitate to use the chat. I will try to answer them over time. And we will also have a Q&A session at the very end. But yeah, don't hesitate to stop me, write in the chat, and I'll try to answer as much as I can. Let's start with the HCPs and why we should be on social media. As of today, 50 million of the HCPs worldwide are using social media. They may not be all using social media always for professional use. They may use them for their own personal use Instagram, even use TikToks for the young ones. But a lot of these are also using networks like LinkedIn and so on for their professional appearance. And they're also using these other professional networks. So there are a lot of different ways to use social networks, and a lot of HCPs and physicians being on these networks. So it is something that we cannot forget anymore, that we cannot ignore anymore. Another interesting fact is that 80% of these of the physicians do trust social media for scientific exchange. It's not like a few years ago where everything that was on Twitter was fake or didn't exist. Here, there is a trust in what can be found in social media. The trust doesn't come from the quality having necessarily improved, but the background of the HCPs has improved in order to be able to recognize what is a trustful media online on social media and what is not a trustful source. So it's important to see that that a lot of professionals are on social media already, and that a lot of them actually trust the information which is on it. Some sources say that HCPs spend up to 2 hours a day, or 2 hours 22 to be precise, every day on social media. To be honest, I would doubt the source of 2 hours 22. I do think that it's a lot, but still, having studies showing that over 2 hours are spent every day on social media, even if we divide it by 4 and saying that they spend only half an hour, or even if they spend only 15 minutes, that's actually very important, because it's 15 minutes spent online looking for informations by the HCP. So it's 15 minutes that we know that we can reach them. It's often these 15 minutes or 2 hours 22 if we took the original source. This is time where we would have issues bringing the users to our website, but we could go where they are, which is in that case on the social media. And the last point that is important when we think about should we go social or not is are we able actually to reach the people who are on social media? Because one thing is that the HCPs are on social media. The other thing is, are we actually able to be in front of these HCPs while they're online? And the best way to do that nowadays is still advertisements. And studies have shown that when the advertisements are relevant and appropriate, they actually notice it. So if you have good content, it will be seen if you target the relevant people. So knowing that first, a lot of HCPs are online, that they trust what is seen online, and that there is a way to reach them, actually shows us that social media is a good way to start. Is a good place to be when you want to reach HCPs. Now let's go to the meat of the subject: general social networks and professional social networks. First, we need to understand these two groups. The general social networks are the social networks that most of you know, the one that we've been speaking about since 10 years or 2 years for TikTok. It's the Facebook type of networks, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. There are quite a few others, but these are obviously the main ones. It doesn't mean that HCPs always use them to search professional information. They don't always use them for their professional use. For example, a lot of them are on Facebook and on Instagram, but studies have shown that they actually are not always interested in being attacked with ads for about their work on these networks. On the other hand, networks like Twitter and LinkedIn are seen as networks where they actually go for a professional purpose. If they are shown interesting professional content, they may be interested to stay, to read it, and to continue interacting with it. So it is important to understand these general social networks, see where your customers are, because in some countries they may not use Twitter, in some therapy areas you may not have enough people on it. So you need to understand which are the channels that are being used, and based on that, see where you can interact with them. The same applies to the professional social networks. The main difference between the professional social networks and the general ones are that the professionals are limited to a specific niche of users. For example, it may be only physicians, it may be only nurses, it may be only HCPs as a whole, and they also sometimes are limited to specific countries. So there are networks like Thermo, GMed, or DocCheck, which are available in more than one countries. And there are some networks which are really limited to a single country or just a handful of countries. Doximity, for example, is huge in the US. I think it's more than 80% of the physicians in the US are on Doximity, but they are inexistent outside of the US. Doctors.net of the UK is very big in the UK, obviously, but nobody is ever using it outside of the UK. And then you have some apps which focus on specific languages or regions. For example, Tonic app is more present in the south of Europe. Colicchio is present everywhere where people speak German, so in the DACH region. Each of these networks have their specificities that we'll go into a bit later on. But what is interesting to understand is that these professional networks are actually tailored and optimized for the physicians or for the HCPs. And that brings us to the main difference between the general and the professional social networks, the access. On a general social media like Twitter or LinkedIn, anybody can go on it and anybody can access it. Which means that in some countries you cannot show information like branded information, you cannot speak about drugs, but you need to limit yourself to everything which is news sharing or disease education, things like that. On the other hand, on professional social media, the access is closed and is limited only to these to the niche they focus on. So let's say that they're focusing on all HCPs. You need to actually be a verified HCP to have access to it. That makes that they are often smaller than the general social media. They may have less physicians, but what is interesting is you know that you're speaking with physicians. And by knowing your audience, you're able to actually give much more technical content. And you're also able to give content that you would legally not be allowed to show to patients or to non-physicians. And that's a huge opportunity because it allows you to have things like cases discussion. You can have technical collaboration. You can have branded content on these networks, and have actually in-depth discussions, which are not possible on general social media. It doesn't mean that they are better for everything. Obviously, general social media will allow you to have a higher reach. You will have more people which are on it because they are more known. You may have campaigns which work on for both patients and HCPs, as we will see in one of the examples further down. But on the other hand, professional social media will make sure that you're speaking, for example, only to dermatologists or only to oncologists. That brings us to the other differences which are between these. the advertising opportunities. When you start doing advertisements on general media, you will have to focus on everything which is around disease education, disease awareness, because that's what's allowed on the platform, and that's what's allowed legally in most of the countries. You will be able to do conference coverages. That's very often, so most of the networks, especially Twitter, are used for the conference coverage. Basically, everybody who's at the conference starts saying, okay, we are doing this, we are doing that, I've seen this, I've seen that. And it is very important to be part of this discussion if you want to have a strong digital presence around the conference. Another advantage of the general social media is that the cost per click is relatively low compared to other types of sources. If you, for example, speak about medical journals, you may pay 50, 70, 80 euros for a single click. When you speak about things like Medscape, again, you may speak about a significant price for each HCP you reach. On general social media, it's going to be a few euros usually. It could be between 3 and 15 euros, depending on the period of the year, depending on how targeted you are, depending on the country where you are, but it's still low compared to other networks. The disadvantage is very often the traffic is relatively limited because most of the people want to stay on the platform. So you should optimize your advertisement for things which are on the platform. We'll go more in details into advertisement for general social media in a few slides. But keep in mind that overall you'll have to focus on disease education. You'll have a lower cost, and you'll have a lot of flexibility in terms of budgets. You could do a test for 500 euros. You could do a test for 1,500 euros. You don't have to come and put on the table 500,000 for every campaign that you want to do. On the other hand, for professional social media, you will be able to do much more engaging campaigns in terms of branding. First, you will be able to promote your actual drugs and not only disease education. You will be able to have a much better targeting because you know exactly who's a physician and who's not, while on general social media, very often you rely on what they say, or you rely on other ways to target them. So they may or may not be physicians, while on these professional social media, you know 100% that they are physicians. You may even know specialties within their therapy area. So you may know the specialty within cardiology. You may also know if somebody is a nurse or simply interested in nephrology. So the targeting will be much more precise, and you will have way more formats in order to advertise to your target. If we speak about general social media, we speak about sharing links, sharing videos, sharing images. While if we speak about professional social media, suddenly we open a new door to a lot of different things like case studies, microsites, newsletters. So you could even combine things where you have somebody who visits your microsite on a social network, or who interacts with a post that you do, and then you send emails specifically to these people. Because on these networks, as everybody is recognized, you know who's doing what. So you can start having a multiple touchpoint campaign where you can say, okay, I will show this certain type of contents to the people who have already interacted with my ads, with my case study, or something like that. So to summarize, each of the networks is really optimized for the way they work. The general social media are open, and that's why they will be optimized to have everybody on it. You need to filter what you say on it, but you're going to have more reach. And the professional social network will allow you to go much more in depth, have more engagement with the people, have more formats, but will also be more expensive because it's a closed platform owned by few companies. So starting a campaign on professional social media will be at around 20,000, depending on how many countries you have, how many specialties you have, and how many formats you use. But you will very probably not go under 20,000 euros. While on social media, you could start with 10 euros if you want to start so. now that we understand the difference between general and professional social network, the idea is to go a bit more in depth into what are the specialties for each of these. If we look at general social networks, like again Twitter, LinkedIn, and these networks, there are two main ways to reach the physicians, what we call organic and paid. Organic is basically anything that you would post on your account without having to open your wallet, so without having to pay for anything. So for example, you may have a corporate account. If you post something on your corporate account, that's going to be free. The main issue here is the reach. Basically, you will only show your information or your contents to the followers of your account, or to the people who actually follow a hashtag that you may have included in your post. That makes that very often, to be honest, in most of the companies I've seen, you reach 10 people, you reach 5 people, or you reach people who are not your HCPs, because a lot of times these corporate accounts are only used for investors, for press, for eventually some patients, a handful of HCPs. So you will reach, in terms of impressions, quite a few people. In terms of interactions, you'll see very little of it, simply because you may not have only your target group in your followers. It does have advantages, because if you have followers, HCP followers, over time you may create a relationship with them. You may appear more often in their feed. You may create your brand image, and you will be able to share all types of content for which you may not want to pay. For example, news, emotional content, or patient generated content. But the reach will probably be very limited. You can obviously start specific social media for HCPs, but nowadays starting a new account from scratch is very difficult, and you do have to pay to actually get enough followers. And even when you have a lot of followers, it's still very difficult for your content to be seen by them. Let's say that you have a Twitter account. An average percentage of people who actually see your content is 3 to 4% of your followers. So imagine that you have 2,000 HCPs as followers, then you're just going to have a few hundred actually looking at or a few tens actually looking at your content. On the other hand, you have paid content. A lot of the general social network actually push people to pay, first because they need to show investors that they make money, but also because that's how they want, that's the only way they can actually make money at the end of the day. So they've reduced all the organic reach that you have and increased the possibilities and the flexibilities that you have when you have paid content. So with paid content, you can actually target way more people. We'll see a bit later what could be targeting options. You can actually reach a lot of HCPs which are on the platform, as long as you do your targeting correctly. You can use it to increase the awareness of your product, of your disease, and of your brand in general, in terms of company brand. And you can also use it to create leads and conversions. When I say leads, it could be trying to get people to sign up for your newsletter, or to sign up to download the specific content, or even to sign up to a webinar, for example. And the type of content that you would have on it, as I said, is mostly disease awareness, education, or it could be conference promotion. If we look specifically at the pros and cons of paid social media, what we will see is, as I said, very often they are cheaper than other advertisement solutions. They are relatively efficient in their targeting, because in some platforms you will just be able to target people interested in nephrology, while on, for example, LinkedIn, you may target people who say they're nephrologists, or on Twitter you may target people who follow specific nephrology journals. So you can have quite an efficient targeting, and you have very visual formats. Nowadays, a lot of the HCPs are actually asking for very visual short types of formats. They don't want to have these 20 pages publications anymore, or only in specific cases. They want to have short videos, images, infographic, and social media are actually very much optimized for that. And paid social media will allow you to have this type of channels. The main disadvantages is obviously the limitations. As I said, you will be limited to what is legal to be shown to everything, which is most of the time disease awareness. You may have some compliance issues internally to see what you're allowed to share, what you're not allowed to share. And if you think that if you want to use it as a traffic generation, you need to keep your hopes relatively low, because it will generate traffic, but it is quite limited compared to other sources of traffic. It is so social media are best used when you actually keep people on the platform and don't try to get them out of the platform. Let's see a couple of examples of social media campaigns that have been done on for example, Twitter and TikTok. On the left, you can see the empathy gloves. This is a campaign that has been started by Athenex, and the idea is that they wanted for conference to have HCPs try gloves to feel how their oncology patients were feeling after taking some with some specific disease. And they created this campaign in order to bring people to the booth to test it, and to have them then share their experience with other people. So over just 3 days, they had 380 HCPs actually sharing their experience on social media. So it's not only about people going to their stand. They also had people going to the stand and then going back to their social media and sharing their experience. And obviously, once you have the HCPs sharing their own experience, the people following the HCPs see it, so you get way more visibility, but you also get a lot of credibility. And we'll speak about influencer campaigns further a bit later on. But you start creating a lot of credibility by using these other HCPs to pass over your message. So by doing these paid campaigns, they brought people to the booth, and the booth then created an amazing experience which motivated them to actually share it back on social media. This is a very good example because of the quality of the content, not of the quality of the content of the post itself, which is quite normal, but the quality of the end user experience. What they had to try was very different. It was not only simply come to my booth and I will show you a presentation, but really come try something that you've never done and understand your patient in a way that you've never done it before. And this way of thinking about content is really the only way you will be able to differentiate yourself and to actually get people to interact with your brands and remember what you're telling them. Another example that has been quite successful is the Do You Dance Challenge, which was a sickle cell disease campaign, where basically the campaign was targeted to both patients and HCPs, and they wanted to raise awareness about this disease. And what they did is they had a professional dancer create a choreography for people with sickle cell disease then to replicate. And again, within a few weeks of the campaign, they had more than 200 dance videos created by patients. And these videos in total had over 6 million views. The hashtag itself had over 51 million views, and the shares, the number of people who actually used the hashtag was over 6 million. So the 200 videos were shared millions of times, which give them an incredible visibility, all starting with one content. Again, here, when I say great content, it's not only about great content on social media, but the campaign itself had something very different and had something that fitted very well to social media. Nowadays, everything on TikTok is about dancing. Most of the campaign was on TikTok, and they actually found a type of content that fitted exactly the platform they used, and that allowed them to then reach the audience they wanted to have. So in both cases, we speak about content that's very different from the rest, that is adapted to the platform, and that was able to get viral, but only after it started with promotional content. They didn't simply post it and cross finger on their account. They actually did a heavy paid campaign at the beginning to give enough visibility to get them the content to be viral. A last thing about paid general social media, which is important to know, is targeting. How do you actually choose who will see your advertisements? You have a lot of different ways to do that, and that's different from one platform to the other. But I wanted to just discuss 3 of them, which I think are interesting. The first one is the followers lookalike. This is specific to Twitter, for example, and Instagram. You can actually target the people who are following a specific account or who have a very similar profile in terms of who they follow and with whom they interact to the people who follow a specific account. So you can, for example, say, I want to target all the people who follow this specific conference. And when you are actually doing a campaign for a conference, that may then be very interesting because you target exactly the people who are already interested in the conference. But you can go further and say, okay, I want to target all the followers of this specific journal, medical journal, of the therapy area that I'm interested in, of this specific journal. So you can, for example, say, I will target only the oncology section of EMJ. So if EMJ has an oncology European Journal of Medicine section, you can target specifically these people. And this is very interesting because very few patients are actually following these accounts. So it's a nice way to target your HCPs. Another way to target them is to actually choose hashtags. This is, again, very much used for Twitter, but it also works for LinkedIn. So very much used for Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, actually. But as we focus on HCPs, the most interesting in our case is Twitter. And the idea here is that a lot of people actually are using hashtags to keep informed on specific topics. It can be, for example, on a therapy area, or it can be on a specific part of the therapy area. For example, you can follow cardiology, or you can follow a specific part of the cardiology. But where I use it most is, again, for conferences. That's the time where all the HCPs are online, and the one who are not able to attend a specific conference will follow the hashtag to know, okay, what is being said right now at the conference. And that's a very good way to be actually in front of eyeballs of these users at the right time, and when they're actually seeking for this type of information. Because one thing we should never forget is that not everybody wants to read contents all the time. Sometimes they just go and want to see what their friends are saying, or they're just looking at their Twitter to see if anything big is happening. But when they go and follow a specific hashtag on a conference, they're usually in the mood of being informed, knowing what happens, and that's how you can get the best conversions in terms of people engaging with the content and reading it. Another way to target people is by job function. This one is specifically for LinkedIn. It is very interesting because you can very precisely say, I want to target only nurses, or I want to target only nephrologists. And you will then have the possibility to show your ad only to these people. What I've seen in my experience is that even though it's self-declared, and obviously anybody could say, I'm a nephrologist, or I'm a cardiologist, or an oncologist, not many people actually fake that in LinkedIn. When you target oncologists on LinkedIn, you will most likely get HCPs on your website. And how do I know that? Because nowadays, a lot of websites actually ask people if they are HCPs or not when they land on the website. And that allows us actually to make sure that we're not targeting patients and something like that. If you monitor that on your website, you can then see that your ads targeted the right people. So followers, lookalike, hashtags, job functions are good ways to target people on these networks. It is very important to have a good strategy, because if you don't choose the right targeting, you may not have enough reach. So you may not reach enough people for your campaign to be effective. That's why when you look at followers lookalike, you may want to also look at followers of influencers, followers of journals, followers of conferences. So you may want to go broader to have enough people. And when you work on job function, you may also be careful not to by bad targeting reach, for example, pharma marketers. That happens very often. I've seen agencies targeting, for example, people interested in nephrology or nephrology specialists. And what we saw is that very often they ended up targeting people in the competitor pharma companies. And you can easily see that because very often, even within their own companies, suddenly they have colleagues say, hey, why am I seeing your ads? Simply because you may have a marketer who says, yeah, I'm an oncology specialist, and then we show the ad. So it is important to choose your targeting wisely to make sure that you actually reach HCPs and not patients, and also that that you don't reach other type of professionals. Let's speak a bit about the professional social networks now. As I said, just remember the main difference between general and social networks is the way people log into these networks. And we know that people on professional social networks are HCPs, physicians, nurses. So we know what their actual job function is. So that makes the content that you will share very different. There are two main types of professional social networks. The first one being what we call the social feed. So these are almost exact replicas of Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on. You will have a news feed. So basically people log in and they see the posts from the people they're actually following or from the topic they're following, and you have ads within that. And it really feels and looks like an actual social network. And on the other hand, you have networks which actually allow you to create microsites. These are usually older networks which were created at the time of the forums. So they started actually as a forum, and they very often still have the option of the forum. So basically general posts where people can interact, but not like comment the same way as in a social network. But very often these have then developed by allowing pharma companies to have their own section within their website, which are microsites. And we'll see that some of the networks actually combine both newsfeed and microsites, but most of them actually do specialize in one or the other. If you look at Gmail, for example, they allow you to have your own microsites, but they actually allow interactions around the microsites, so you can have likes and comments on your comments. And MedShare actually does almost exclusively Facebook-like types of content. So you will have a post where you have an image, a link, or video, and then some text, and people will start interacting under it. These are great for everything where you actually want people to engage. And what works best in this type of content are case studies. You have anonymized case studies where basically you say, a physician may say, I met a patient which has this and that issues. He may even share an X-ray or some type of technical data in it. And then he will have peers interacting with him, giving advices or asking other questions in order to go further into the thinking. So this is very strong in terms of engagement, because people don't simply read passively what you've written, but actively participate to the discussion. It is also interesting because you get, as a pharma company, you start getting data from the HCPs. You may understand what are their questions, you may understand what are their thoughts or their opinions, and then you will adapt other type of contents or even your discussions from your sales team with them based on the outputs you may have on such a campaigns. The professional social network very often, when you do advertisement, give you information about, or they always give you information about your actual post, but sometimes they also give you information about what works in your therapy area, what doesn't work, what type of contents resonates most. And you can even pay to have statistics on everything within a therapy area. For example, you may know what are the most important topics nowadays on oncology. You may understand what are the main posts that have been successful, being your posts or physician posts. So not only can you actually advertise on these networks and get your own information from your advertisements, you can also get information about the network as a whole to better understand what could work, what could not work on these media. And this is very unique because almost no other platforms, for example, medical journals and most of the medical media, are not able to give you this type of information. If we take the two divisions we've discussed, local versus global professional networks and social feeds versus microsites, we can see actually that we can split the networks in 4 different groups. You can see the international ones, which look a bit like Facebook, which are Sermo, Figure One, and MedShare. Then you can see the equivalents only in the US, which is the Doximity. And you can see all the microsites type of networks like Esanum, DocCheck, and DoctorSnack groups together. What is interesting is to see that very often these local microsites have the best reach. Why is that? It comes from actually the fact that they have been here much longer than the Sermo and MedShare and so on. As I said, a lot of them have started as a forum, so they've started quite some time ago. Some others then started afterwards, but allowing directly to have microsites and things like that. So their age allows them to have now a very strong user base. And very often, if you want to reach a maximal amount of people, you would need to go to these, so maximal amount of people within each country, you will need to go to several of these networks. While if your main objective is just engagement, even with less people, you would prefer to go to the social, more social feed networks and eventually the international ones. But you will very probably have a lower reach. If we take Sermo, for example, they may just have a few hundred cardiologists in Germany, while on Esanum, you may have the majority of the German cardiologists on the platform. So a different use for different objectives. Engagement, knowledge about your user, you may go with these social feed platforms, or maximal reach, you may want to go to these Esanum or to these local platforms. A last topic I wanted to discuss before repeating the main points of the content are the digital opinion leaders, DOL. They are the new KOLs, basically. So if you want to understand what they are, just take your understanding of who's a key opinion leader and just think about the same thing on social. So who has a good reputation, who's trusted and knowledgeable, and has a high reach on social media or generally online. Why would you use them? For the exact same reason that you would use key opinion leaders. Basically, you would try to leverage their reputation, increase your trust with other HCPs by using actually their own trust, and the logic is exactly the same as for the KOLs. The difference, however, come at that point is how do you choose them? How do you find the right ones? Here in social media, we're not only speaking about reach, because it may be very easy to get a lot of followers. What is interesting is first to see, are these followers actual HCPs? So I've seen influencers campaigns where people say, try this professional or this influencer because he's got 10,000 followers. But then by looking at it, we saw that he just had a handful of actual HCPs. And most of the followers were bots or patients or other types of people who are not actually relevant for us. So it is very important when you choose the right ones to look at who are their followers, Are they actually HCPs or are they something else? And how much interaction do they have with the HCP? Because if they never interact, you can see that on the posts. If they never like them, we share them. If they never answer them, then they may not be the right, so that the influencer may not be the right one, because you actually don't want simply somebody with a lot of followers. You want somebody who actually created enough trust for people to engage with his content. So this engagement seems very obvious, but in most of the influencer campaigns I've seen, people just went with big numbers and said, this one has a lot of followers, so let's go there. You may sometimes want to actually help digital opinion leaders being stronger digitally. So if you already have relationship with KOLs who are starting online, you may actually try to manage them, to train them to have a better reach, to have better engagement. That would also allow you to have a better trust between this influencer and you. But if you don't have the energy, the means to do that, then you need to go with people who already have this engagement and this experience. What's the best way to use them? Again, it's thinking about what would be the best content for them and for their followers, and as such for your audience as well. So you cannot simply say, hey, I have my content, I will give it to a digital opinion leader, and everybody will be happy. You need to think about authenticity, about transparency, what would be a good content that actually adds value and is not simply a sales pitch that I push to the influencer. How can I have something that's actually interactive, and how can I make it easy for the influencer? So how can I actually make it clear for him how should he post, when should he post, what is the best way? And you need to do this type of agreement from the beginning onwards, because I've also seen issues with people simply getting an agreement and having expectations from the DOL. They thought, okay, we're going to have so many content every month. He's going to push all the content we had, and then at the point of actually doing the campaigns, the HCPs was very selective on what he wanted to share and how often. So you need to have clear guidelines on what you want him to share, agree with him, how often, and this type of things from the beginning. So have a content strategy on overall for social media, and have a content strategy for the digital opinion leaders to make sure that you are successful, and agree with them on this strategy. Let's look at a few examples of digital opinion leaders campaigns. If you look at the left one, which was on Twitter, we're speaking about a dermatologist who has only, so to say, around 2,400 followers, but a very large majority of these are actually HCPs. Pfizer used him actually to promote their own contents. They promoted two types of content, either their own website, so you can see that he's actually promoting a link. If people click to the link, you'll get to a Pfizer website. So they use him to promote their own content, but they also use him to get information about HCPs. In that case, he's doing a poll, and basically a poll allows you to ask any question to the followers of the person doing the poll, and that allowed them to get information they would have not received any other way. Just to say, a poll on Twitter paid, I think you can have only two choices, so it's very limited. While if it's an organic post by an influencer, you can have a much stronger, you can have way more options, which gives you also more information. So they used it to get people to their websites. So they use the influencer also to get people to their website and to get additional information. The middle example is also with Twitter. Twitter is very often one of the best ways to get the general social network influencers to interact, because it's open and everybody can see them. That's why they can turn into influencers. So here Johnson & Johnson used the HCPs in a webinar. He actually participated to the webinar, and then he promoted the webinar on his own post. So here is a post from Johnson & Johnson, but he also posted on his own sites, and that allowed then Johnson & Johnson to have a lot of visibility for their webinar with the followers of this user. And the last example is from V4. They've made a campaign with nurses in Australia, and they actually wanted to do a disease awareness campaign. They use Instagram because apparently, based on their study, a lot of nurses are actually using Instagram even for professional information. So they shared disease awareness information directly on the platform. Instagram doesn't allow to easily have links within the content. So here you want to have the content directly on the platform, and they actually optimize their campaign and their platform for that. So they didn't simply try to replicate something that would come from another platform. And we get to the last point of the webinar, the quality of the content. I wanted to leave you with 5 key steps or concepts that you need to keep in mind when you start having content, when you start developing content. The very first one is seems obvious but is always forgotten, is understand your audience. You need to understand what could be interesting for them. I know it's obvious, but most of the companies forget it, especially when you have strong creative agencies trying to sell you every type of content. So I've seen too many companies trying to, agencies selling a quiz, selling a new website, selling a new whatever, and that was not interesting for the HCPs. So have the HCPs participate to your content plan as well, understand what they are interested in which format, and that's the only way for you to actually be successful. Stand out is very important because a lot of content is on this platform. A lot of content from other HCPs, from other types which have nothing to do with HCPs, but you're still in competition with them in order to get the attention of the users. And also a lot of your competitors are doing campaigns nowadays. So you need to find a way to stand out, to be different. And if you don't think about that from the beginning, people will simply ignore your ads, ignore your presence, and you will have spent a lot of money for nothing. So think about what makes us different in this content, in this platform. Why should somebody actually see our content and then interact with this content? The third point is adapt to the platform. You could see with the example that we had about the dancing campaign that the company actually optimized, so looked at what worked well on TikTok. They saw that TikTok was mostly about dance, so they did content around dancing. If they would have simply have an HCP speaking during 2 minutes, it would have never worked. On the other hand, if they would have put this dancing contest only on Twitter, it would probably also have never worked because that's not the type of content that works there. So you need to understand what content works in each platform. And this is different for each therapy area. It's different at each point of time as well. For during a conference, it may be different than outside of a conference. Post-COVID, it's different than pre-COVID and so on. And also from one platform to the other. In LinkedIn, you may have a stronger area for text, a bigger area for text, but a smaller one without the user clicking on it than on Twitter. On Twitter, you'll be limited to around 300 characters, but people will see the whole 300 characters from the beginning. So think about these specificities every time you start your platforms, your campaigns. Engage, try to find a way to engage. If it's only about impressions, only about clicks, people will not be interested in your content. Try to get them to actually not be passive, and that's how you will have people remember you. And the last one is what we call move. What we've seen is that nowadays everything which is video content is in average more successful than static content. Move can also be, for example, carousel ads where you go from one image to the other, but having more than simply one static image usually gives you better results. And by including your video content on the platform and not always sending the user to your own website will also allow you to have more success. Remember that a majority of the HCPs say they don't like pharma websites. So if you have statistics telling you that HCPs are on social media and at the same time that they don't want to be on your website, then think about including your content, your video, and all that directly on social media. That would be everything for today. Is there any question from anybody? If no question, then I assume everything was clear. Okay, then somebody has one. Jonathan. When it comes to HCP's activity on social media, is there a lot of difference between countries? That's actually an interesting question. What we've seen is, yes, there's a lot of difference. As always, the US is always in the future. They have more people on social media. They have more people interacting than overall in Europe. If you look at Europe, you will again see a huge difference between Northern Europe and Southern Europe. If you look at Northern Europe, like Germany and so on, people are on social media and they actually look at the content, but they don't engage much. And as such, the campaigns, so the quantity of content which is online is much lower than in the southern countries. In the southern countries, especially in Spain, you will have a lot of interactions. You will have a lot of people actually sharing, interacting, commenting. And because of that, you'll also have different prices, because you will have way more people also fighting for these eyeballs. And it may sometimes be counterintuitive to see that a campaign in Spain is more expensive than in a country like Germany, where usually all the other channels are more expensive. But this is because Germans are less likely to interact on social media. And then you have the UK, which is usually also quite strong in terms of interactions, quality of content, and so on. But what we've seen is really somehow Spain is a different world in Europe, especially in terms of Twitter. Regarding professional social networks, the difference is a bit less obvious, because you had local players like Esanum in Germany adapting to the way the Germans interact and the way they actually consume content. So you may have still good results in Germany by using this type of content of networks. If there is no other question, then I will thank you, everybody. You all have my emails through the various reminders you've received, so don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question later on, or if you want to discuss something more specifically. So feel free to reach out, and I wish you a very nice evening. Bye bye.